Chapter 1. The City That Floats. Geyer City, 2069. A sprawl of lashed rafts, rusted hulls, and plastic stitched together across the Pacific. Home because the sea had swallowed everything else. Home because there was nowhere left to drift. The city creaked with every wave. Boards knocked against barrels, drums groaned under the weight of shacks, and the great cinch ropes that bound the whole flotilla thrummed like the strings of a dying instrument. The spine walkway carried people like veins carried blood. Barterers, scavengers, and enforcers all threading through the rattling heart of the floating world. Kai rose from the sea, pulling himself over a ladder slick with algae. He hauled up his net of salvage: copper wire, cracked lenses, a rusted but usable clamp. Sam, the boy who detached himself to Kai 2 seasons ago, grabbed it with wiry hands. "You were under forever," Sam said, eyes wide. "Thought you drowned." "Nearly," Kai muttered, spitting brine. "The ferry's belly is collapsing. Won't be worth diving much longer." Sam's grin flashed, then faltered. "There's talk in the pit. They hauled in a big one, a container. The Baron's got it locked up." Kai straightened, rope burns stinging his palms. A container meant risk and riches both. Most held junk, but some held relics worth dying for. "What kind?" "Marked," Sam whispered. "Biohazard." The pit buzzed with noise when they reached it. A bowl of rafts lashed together, stalls ringing the rim, the center cleared for trade and judgment. Smoke from cook fires hung like a ceiling. At its heart sat the container, 40 feet of rust and faded paint, stenciled with a black trefoil and the word Meridian. Barons ringed it with weapons in hand, pipes, machetes, a few dented firearms with precious rounds. Baroness Coro herself stood before the crowd, coat patched from 3 colors of oilskin, soda tab collar flashing silver in the sun. "This is ours," she announced, voice sharp as glass. "Meridian built it, but we found it. What's inside will serve Geyer City. Through us." A murmur rippled. Nobody trusted "through us" when it came from a baron's lips. The first pry bar screeched against the lock. The crowd surged forward, half hungry, half afraid. The lock snapped. The doors groaned open. Cold air poured out, heavy with the stench of flowers left too long in a vase. Inside, stacked like cordwood, lay rows of translucent body bags. Frost clung to the plastic. Faces showed through, pale, waxy, mouths slightly open. For a breath, nobody moved. Then a knee twitched. A throat convulsed. The scream went up like fire. The bags split as the figures inside lurched. Hands tore through plastic, nails black and broken. A corpse toppled out, jaw snapping too wide, teeth clacking as brine spilled from its throat. Another followed, eyes milk white, skin sloughing in strips. The pit erupted in chaos. A vendor swung a mop handle, wood snapping against a skull that didn't care. The creature lunged, teeth sinking into his arm with a wet crunch. Blood sprayed across a stall. He shrieked, fell, and vanished under the thrashing bodies. "Run!" Kai shouted, yanking Sam toward the spine. The crowd became a wave, traders shoving, children screaming, enforcers swinging wildly. The smell of brine and blood mixed with cooking smoke until every breath was poison. At the pit's edge, Mira stood in the doorway of her container clinic, sleeves rolled, apron already spattered. "Here," she cried, waving them in. Kai shoved Sam inside, slammed the door, and braced it with his shoulder. Outside, people screamed as the first of the dead hit the walkways, jaws tearing at anything living. Mira bolted the door, her eyes flicked to Kai's dripping net, then to his face. "You were near the intake?" "Dove the ferry wreck." Her lips went thin. "Then you know, it's still on. They're pulling everything inside." Sam blinked. "The water?" "All of it," Mira said. "Every mouthful, every drop." The door rattled, a weight slammed against it. Then another. Jax pushed through the curtain at the back of the clinic, a broad-shouldered man with a face carved in scars. A pipe wrench hung in his grip, knuckles already bloody. "They'll break the pit," he said. His voice was gravel, steady. "Meridian made things that ate oil and plastic, sold them to clean seas, then war bought them to clean bodies. Bugs don't care what they're pointed at. They only care that they eat." Outside, the screaming rose. From beneath their feet came a sound, dull, heavy. Once, twice, a patient knock that wasn't the sea. Chapter 2. Thirst. The knock under Mira's clinic did not keep time so much as insist on it. It outlasted the siren, outlasted the shouting, found the holes between footsteps, and made a home there. A patient metronome no one asked for. By morning, the city had learned to listen around it. People spoke in scraps, drank air like it was water, and eyed the real water with the suspicion you save for a friend who's suddenly gone quiet. Kai slept no more than a doze at a time, cheek against a coil of rope, his cuts singing in salt and antiseptic. When he rose, Sam was already awake, knees to chest, counting drips from the desal bucket with his lips moving. The bucket's slow, clear rhythm said one thing: enough for a few mouths, not for a city. Mira stood over the hot plate with a pot the size of a toddler. Rolling boil, she said to the room, to herself, to the idea that instructions could still pull people back from edges. Not a tremble, not a whisper, a boil that bites. She had pinned a sheet outside the clinic door. Boil water, always, and beneath it, in a steadier hand than the city deserved. 3 minutes if you can spare the fuel. Filter through cloth first. Do not trust clearness. Jax watched her with his arms folded, making inventory in his head the way men do when they have done worse inventories. Intake's down, he said, but Deck 5 has a splash pipe that feeds the upper rigs. I can close it. After that, what comes inside comes through people. What about the Barons? Sam asked. They're telling folks to go home. Home to thirst, Mira said. Home to not knowing who drank what last night. She ladled boil into jars, capped them, and pressed one into Sam's hands. Delivery. Another into Kai's. Pit cellars first. They feed the lanes. They went out into a morning already too loud. The pit's bowl had grown teeth overnight, checkpoints where there had been tables, lines that were once ropes now rendered as law. Enforcers wore bandanas and metal badges cut from soup tins. A loudhailer crackled on a raised pallet. Quarantine ring alpha, ring beta, ring gamma. Remain in your sector. Water provided at noon. Noon, Sam muttered, like the word fixes the throat. Armin had dragged her soup drum sideways and turned it into a still. A window pane angled over a blackened pot, a catch bottle at the low corner, a gasket made of stripped bicycle tube. Condensate ticked into the bottle, clean as truth. You were right, she told Kai without looking up. I poured out a morning's work. Her eyes were red. I'll make it back. You'll make it different, Kai said, setting the jar by her elbow. Warn the ones who think a cloth is a miracle. Barons say tablets will come, she said flatly. They said the word purification like it was a prayer. Tablets won't fix this, Mira said from behind them, arriving with the certainty of someone who'd given up sleep and traded it for purpose. They might help, but not alone. Boil. She raised her voice so the thin crowd could hear without thinking they were being addressed. If the water was a person, it caught something new. Then maybe we should throw it overboard, someone said bitterly, and a few people laughed the way you laugh when your teeth don't want to chatter. Sam had a map in his head that was all tension and slack, seams and seams between seams. He ran it. He ducked a line, slid a palm under a stanchion, paused to listen for knocks before jumping a gap where two rafts had argued in the night and decided to disagree forever. He set jars at corners with chalk marks, 2 X's for babies, 1 X for elders, a circle where the jar should be traded forward. At a flight of plastic crates that wanted to be stairs, a woman with a tote full of empties tried to climb and failed on the second step. Sam put his shoulder under her elbow, and when she reached the top, she kept going, face set in a way that made him want her to win something, somewhere. Bless you, she said, as if the old words still belonged, and Sam let it stick. Blessings and curses were both cheap until they weren't. The city smelled like someone had tried to erase yesterday with a rag and only smeared it around. A net hung heavy with sardines, and another thing the fishermen had not wanted to bring up. A wrist tangled in monofilament, fingers swollen and pale, nails long like they had been growing in darkness. The men untwisted the line with concentration so fierce it looked like love. then cut the wrist free and kicked it back through a square in the boards as if that returned it to where it deserved to be. The water accepted without comment. "Don't look," a fisherman told Sam, which of course made him look. The wrist turned in the green and drifted away like a leaf. On deck 5, the splash pipe roared like a voice that had swallowed too much and was proud of it. The pipe took wave over the lip and shot it into a gutter that fed the upper rig's tanks. Jax shouldered through a skein of rope and put both hands on the valve. "Cover," he told Kai again. "And if I ask for help, help." Kai braced the club and eyed the passage. The city's underways had always been haunted by the usual. Eels, rats, the notion of depth. Now there were shapes that didn't know they were fish and didn't know they were men. You could hear them before you saw them. The wrong rhythm of touch on hull. The knock under Mira's clinic had taught him the new music. This was a different drummer, but the beat belonged to the same band. The valve refused until it didn't. Jax's shoulders opened. The pipe choked and then went quiet. Above, a string of tanks would slowly go still and go true and then go empty, and the people who had trusted their regular trickle would learn a new word. Wait. "You make a lot of enemies fast," Kai said. "I already had them," Jax said, breath a little ragged. "I'm just reminding them." He wiped his mouth and eyed the gutter. "There are more pipes, but this buys the city a few hours and some sore throats. Better than full cisterns with a new disease." They pulled back to the spine. The Barons were at the top of the pit now, taking a shape around a pallet that wanted to be a podium. The woman who stepped onto it wore a coat stitched from weather jackets in 3 colors and a collar of soda tabs that caught light like coins. Koro, Kai knew, Baroness Koro, who had turned the salvage of women and children into a force you paid to pass. She lifted the loud hailer like a prize. "People of Geyer City," she said, "there has been a contamination incident. We have secured the container. Our water will be cleaned. We will provide purification tablets to each sector at midday. Do not boil on open decks. Do not cause fires. Anyone caught spreading panic will be detained." In the lull that follows the first speech on a new day, Mira stepped up on a crate below Koro's platform and did not look at Koro. She looked at faces. "Boil," she said to them. "If you have a pot, use it. If you have a window, make a still. If you have a bag, condense. If you don't know how, I will show you." She held up a pane, a pot lid, a cup, a tube cut from a hose. She assembled a tutorial with the speed of a cooking show and the gravity of an autopsy. "If a tablet comes, take it, then boil anyway." Koro's eyes cut sideways. "Doctor," she said through the loud hailer, the word balled up so it could be thrown, "you're telling people to waste fuel." "I'm telling them to stay alive," Mira said without amplification, and somehow the air carried it as if the city had decided to be the loud hailer for once. For a heartbeat, Koro and Mira looked like 2 women on opposite ends of a rope neither could afford to drop. "Midday," Koro repeated and stepped down. Her enforcers began to hand out foil packets the size of matchbooks, blue tablets in each, printed with a logo that hurt to see after a night like the last. A wave inside a circle, dots around it like a cheerful constellation. "Meridian," Kai said under his breath. "Somebody had a warehouse," Jax said. "Somebody always has a warehouse." "Do they work?" Sam asked Mira, eyes on the foil. "They work for old problems," Mira said. "This isn't old." She took one packet, broke a tablet, and dropped half into a jar. Blue hiss traced through the water, and then sighed into clear. She sniffed. "Chlorine and a friend. Good as a mask in a sandstorm. But the storm is rain." By midday, the sun had apprenticed itself to the job of making people miserable. Heat squeezed the city, and the city creaked back. The smell of the pit turned from soup to battery. People built stills the way birds build nests, furious, improvising. Sure. A sheet of tarp became a condensation tent over a kiddie pool. A gutted solar garden pivoted to catch light into blackened pans. A tower of empty bottles turned into a staircase of drips. Sam moved among them like a sparrow, propping and praising and stealing only what he needed. A minute of someone's attention, a glance at a knot he could fix. At the northeast rim, the rafts gave way to a field of drums and pallets stitched so grudgingly you could see sea between every board. That was where the outcasts lived, the ones the city hadn't bothered to forget because it had never remembered them in the first place. Kai and Jax went there with jars and a coil of new rubber tube. If thirst had a color, it was the mouth of a woman who opened her door with a child on her hip, and a look like she had already buried 3 options and didn't like the fourth. "Boil," Kai said gently, and held up the jar like it was more than a jar. "You don't need me to tell you how, but I'll sit a minute if you want the company." Jax crouched at the edge and eased his weight onto a board that answered with an old man's complaint. He peered between slats. The water below had learned a new trick. It held shapes that only made sense when you stopped wanting them to be anything you already knew. A face, slack, drifted in shadow. It did not belong to the woman at the door, or maybe it did in the way the city made everyone cousin to everyone else. "Something snagged," he said. He slid his hand under the board with the delicacy of a thief. He came up with a mess of fishing line and a pair of sunglasses still folded as if waiting for a pocket. The line tugged back. He pulled and a parcel of kelp lifted, and then a hand, the rest of it somewhere the kelp didn't want to give up. The fingers found the gap and pressed. They did not explore. They asserted. Jax let the line go and leaned his weight on the plank, and the hand lost the argument. It sank. It waited. It would try again. "Don't invite," the woman said hoarsely. "They come when you look at them. My mother said that about bad men. Turns out it's true about watermen too." On the far side of the outcast field, a young diver named Lolo, brown-shouldered, laughed like a dropped pan, had a rope tied at his waist and a cheer at his back. He owed people trinkets and pride. The night's panic had sent a crate into the green. He intended to turn it into debt paid. "Spot me," he said to his friends, and grinned at Kai and Jax as if they were the safety he had ordered. He cut into the water with the clean certainty of someone who had never found a bad thing he couldn't outswim. "Don't," Jax said. "Too late, because it always is." The water closed over Lolo. Bubbles like pennies rose. The rope played out. The friends leaned on it as if they could lift him by will alone. The rope jerked twice. Once. Twice. Then didn't. "Pull," Kai said, and they did together, and Lolo came up shoulders first, the water holding on to the rest of him longer than it should have, as if they were sharing custody. Something was attached to his leg. It looked like a bundle of cloth until it opened its mouth as if remembering how. Lolo screamed and then laughed because he had taught himself to laugh first. "Get it off," he said, extravagantly calm. The thing's teeth worried at the rope around his thigh, not the flesh yet, as if rope was an appetizer. Kai swung the club and met Skull. It yielded the way driftwood yields. First splinter, then give. The bundle let go and drifted, then realized it was supposed to hate more than rope and came back. Jax kicked it hard enough to teach it the difference between a ladder and a man. It sank, insulted. They got Lolo onto a pallet. His leg bled from rope burn more than teeth. Mira arrived breathless, called by whatever quiet system the city used when it wanted to pretend it still had a phone network. She cut the rope, cleaned the wound, poured a sting on it that made Lolo curse his cousins. "If you drink," she told him, "you drink what I hand you." He nodded with his eyes and shook his head with his mouth, and she didn't let either answer stand alone. She bound him, then looked at the water as if it were a patient who wouldn't meet her gaze. "They're learning the undersides," she said. "They like the shade. They like ladders." "They like the lines," Jack said. He squinted at the horizon where the city's cinch ropes met one another in a geometry that turned drift into permanence. "If I were alive, I'd climb what everybody climbs." "And if you were dead?" Sam asked, who had been quiet long enough to earn a sentence. "Same," Jack said, "but maybe slower." By late afternoon, thirst had stopped being an idea and become a personality. Jumpy, irritable, quick to anger, quick to cry. The tablet line wrapped the pit, a polite serpent. People held bottles like hearts and empty cups like prayers. Koro's enforcers passed blue foils into brown hands. "One per household," they said, and meant one per the person we can see. A boy traded his foil for a strip of dried squid, and a woman slapped him and then hugged him and then fed him half the squid and kept the foil. At Mira's crate below the platform, a circle of people watched water move from vapor to drop to pool. A man with a sailor's tattoo asked a question in the shape of an accusation. You telling me the Baron's tablets are lies? I'm telling you they're not the whole truth, Mira said. You can't keep the sea out with a blanket if the ceiling is gone. You can keep the rain off your face. She gestured at the drop, trembling under the pain. This will not taste like victory. It will taste like not losing. Poetry, someone sneered. Instruction, she corrected. Sam stole a glance over at Koro, who watched Mira with a look that was not hate and not fondness, and something of both. Koro lifted the loudhailer again, but said nothing into it, and in that silence the city heard the knock again, the patient metronome under the pit that said, I am still here. I am in the rhythm of your day. I will be in the rhythm of your night. When the sun began to lower itself carefully behind a corrugated horizon, the flotilla's heat loosened its grip just enough to allow thought. Kai and Jax climbed to the top of a solar tower to lay tarp and glass for a still field. From up there, the city looked like a mistake someone had decided to be proud of. A toy left in a tub that had grown barnacles and beliefs. The open water beyond it was a bruise. Kai set a pane, taped a seam, weighed an edge with a spanner. Jax handled the rope. You going to cut a line tonight? Kai asked without looking up. Jax didn't pretend not to know which line. The cinch ropes that made Geyer City one thing instead of many were order and prison both. The barons kept them tight to keep storms from pulling the city apart and to keep people from drifting away without paying the tax for exit. A debt to the crown, a passport nobody could afford to stamp. If I cut quiet, Jack said. People die when things drift wrong. People die when they don't drift at all. He tested a knot and frowned at how right it felt. You still lazy about leaving? It's the only thing I'm lazy about, Kai said. I don't want to start over. He thought of the knock, of Lolo's leg, of Koro's foil, of Mira's pain. But we might have already started and not told ourselves. On the way down, a board went under Kai's foot like a trap door. He dropped to one knee hard enough to see heat. His shin slid into the gap. The sea reached up and touched him with a hand that was not a hand. Fingers closed around his calf, slick and sure. He yelled, not a word. Jax was already on his belly, one arm around the post, the other in the gap with the club. The club met wrist, and the wrist did not believe in the club, and then learned. The fingers loosened. The hands slid down his leg and retreated, reluctant as a tide. Kai rolled onto his back and laughed once because his brain didn't know whether to be grateful or furious. They wait, he said to the sky. They always have, Jax said. We just train them to be patient from below. He hauled Kai up and set his leg on a crate. No bite. Wet, Kai said. That's all. Wet's enough, Jax muttered. He slapped the post. Rope's tight. We should worry more about what happens when it isn't. The sun went down with all the grace of a drunk falling through a floor. The stills ticked in patient tempo. The tablet line wound down. The pit found new ways to scream. And somewhere, under Mira's clinic, under the pit, under the whole-stitched mistake of Geyer City, the knot kept time. Chapter 3, Lines Cinched. The flotilla woke to the sound of ropes tightening. The cinch crews had worked all night, pulling the city into itself until alleys that once held wind now held only neighbors' breath. Boards warped, barrels groaned, and the sea beneath complained with a low, endless creak. From above, Geyer City was a knot with too many hands pulling from too many directions. From below, it was bait. Kai felt it in his feet as he crossed the spine with Sam at his side. The walkway had lost its sway, grown stiff as if it were daring him to test how much weight it could take before giving up. Tighter lines mean less drift, he said, mostly to convince himself. Means less escape, too, Sam said with a boy's frankness. He was carrying jars clinking together in a fishnet satchel. Easier for them to follow. Them? Sam's head tilted toward the water. The knockers. Kai didn't argue. He'd learned last night that naming things wrong didn't make them go away. Quarantine. At the pit, quarantine lines divided the bowl into quadrants. Barons had painted red circles with oil on the boards, each marking where an infected had bled or fallen. The stains were not scrubbed clean but circled like lessons. Enforcers stood at rope barriers with cleavers and pipes. Guns were slung but not drawn. Bullets were a leak you couldn't plug. On the pallet podium, Baroness Coral repeated her noon speech with new teeth. Any raft caught hiding sick will be cut from the cinch and drifted. We will not bleed for cowards. Her voice carried across the pit, amplified by a loud hailer patched with wire mesh. She raised a pouch of blue tablets high, shook it so the rattle was heard, then dropped them into a bucket like dice in a game only she was allowed to win. Purity belongs to those who obey, Mira muttered under her breath. Purity's a word that's killed more people than plague. Kai touched her elbow. She's not talking to us. Then she should be, Mira said, eyes hot. Jax leaned close. We need to move. Quarantine isn't for safety. It's to decide who owns the exits. The first break. They moved north through a narrow run of pallets toward the cinch ropes themselves. The lines were thicker than a man's thigh, braided from tow cable and steel core hose, lashed into drums anchored deep. Men climbed them with grease on their hands, pulling slack from rafts and hitching knots until the whole city shrank. A scream tore from a nearby shack, a woman's voice sharp and ragged. Boards rattled as something slammed against the walls. The crowd surged back as the door banged open. A man stumbled out, shirt soaked dark, one arm gnawed to ribbons. He fell, clutching himself. Behind him, something pushed through the doorframe sideways, shoulders cracking wood. It was his brother, or had been. Now the skin on his face hung in strips like wet laundry. His mouth gaped too wide, teeth broken, tongue black with blood. His eyes were milk, filmed but searching. The infected lurched forward. A woman shrieked, "Cut him!" And an enforcer swung a cleaver. The blade buried itself in the thing's neck but stuck against tendon. The zombie didn't stop. It twisted its head, flesh peeling, and bit into the enforcer's wrist with a wet crunch. The sound was obscene, cartilage and meat tearing like soaked cloth. Blood sprayed, speckling the onlookers. Jax shoved through the crowd, wrench in hand. He brought it down hard. The first strike dented skull, the second split it. Bone gave way with a hollow pop, and gray slurry spilled down the thing's chest. The stench was worse than rot, brine, copper, and something chemical. The body twitched once, then sagged. The enforcer's hand dangled, veins open like frayed rope. Mira shoved past, snapped gloves on, and pressed cloth to the wound. The man's face was white as wax. He's already gone, she said, voice flat, but her hands kept moving anyway. If the water doesn't get him, the fever will. She didn't look up. She didn't have to. Everyone already knew. The crowd was silent except for the rope above them, creaking tighter. Gory lesson. The barons tried to act like it was nothing, barking orders, pulling the corpse aside. But the lesson was too loud to ignore. The things weren't just knocking anymore. They were inside, spreading like spilled oil. That night, Kai, Jax, Mira, and Sam stayed close to the northern cinch lines. Fires were dim, cooking smoke hung like gauze. Every creak sounded like teeth finding wood. They set up near an abandoned solar shack. Doors bolted, barrels stacked. The first knock came just after midnight, a slow scrape along the underside, then another, harder, boards flexing. Kai crouched low, club in hand. The plank bowed, splintered, and gave. A hand burst through, swollen and gray-green, nails thick and curled. Fingers clawed at air. Kai brought the club down. The hand broke but kept moving, bones jutting through skin. He swung again, harder. The wrist snapped, spraying black water. A geyser of bubbles followed, and then the head forced its way through the gap. Its face was half-eaten by the sea, lips gone, jawbone exposed, one eyeball white and bulging from its socket. Barnacles clung to its cheek, pulsing faintly. When it snarled, salt water spilled out, reeking of rot. It lunged up through the boards, snapping its broken teeth. Sam screamed, scrambling back. Jax grabbed it by the hair and slammed its face into the planks. The skin tore loose in his grip, scalp peeling back with a wet rip. The zombie hissed through shattered teeth, clawing with both hands now. Kai brought the club down again, cracking its skull. Bone fragments stuck to the wood. Brackish fluid poured, steaming in the night air. Still it writhed. Mira grabbed a rusted cleaver from her kit, planted her boot on its shoulder, and hacked through the neck. The blade stuck halfway, sinew holding fast. She yanked, twisted, and hacked again. The head tore free in a spray of gore that soaked her apron. The body thrashed once, arms flailing, then slumped back into the sea with a splash. The head rolled across the boards, jaws still snapping, leaving a trail of slime. Jax kicked it hard, sending it tumbling into the dark water where it bobbed, teeth still gnashing. Everyone was panting, chests heaving. Blood and seawater mixed into a black stain between them. "They don't drown," Sam whispered. "Even their heads don't drown." Decision at the lines. At dawn, Mira stripped off her gore-streaked apron, eyes hollow. "We can't wait. Every cinched line they tighten makes this place more of a trap. If we stay, we rot with it." Kai looked out at the ropes. They stretched across the water like prison bars, thick and taut. Beyond them, open sea shimmered, endless and unknowable. "You cut those lines," he said. "You don't come back." Jax tightened his grip on the wrench. "Good. I don't want to." The knock came again, softer this time from below, as if something down there was listening to their words and agreeing. Chapter 4. On the Drift. The flotilla was not one city, but many stitched into one. Ropes and knots made it whole, but every knot had a knife waiting somewhere. By the second night of quarantine, those knots were pulled so tight that boards warped and people slept cheek to cheek with strangers. The air smelled of fear, still water fires, and the tang of blood half-washed by tide. Mira said it first. "We cut, tonight." They met at the northern cinch, where the ropes were thick as thighs and black with grease. The city moaned with each pull, the sound of its own throat closing. Koro's enforcers patrolled the spine in pairs, boots loud, eyes restless. Beyond the ropes stretched dark water, endless, unknowable, freedom and grave in the same breath. Jax hefted his wrench. 3 blows and it loosens. "Then what?" Kai asked. "Then drift. Ghost rigs. Salvage. Maybe find something that floats better than this prison." He grinned without humor. "If the Barons chase, we cut their lines too." Sam's lips were pale. "And if the knockers follow?" "They will," Mira said. Her voice was a blade. "So we make sure we're ready." Cutting free. The rope gave on the second blow. Fibers snapped like bones. Oil sprayed in droplets. The tension bled out with a groan that rolled across the rafts. Boards shivered. For a moment, Kai thought the entire city might notice. But the night was busy with its own fears. They drifted. The spine's lanterns shrank behind them, swallowed by fog. The ocean opened, vast and hungry. Their raft was a patchwork deck of drums and barrels lashed beneath a collapsed solar shack. It creaked like an old man's laugh, but it didn't argue. Sam crouched at the edge, eyes scanning water. "Feels like it's watching." "Not wrong," Jax muttered. Ghost raft. By dawn they reached their first ghost, a section of flotilla that had broken away years ago, drifting into exile. A half-sunken cargo deck rose from the waves, tilted, hull scarred by fire. Plastic bags flapped in the wind like pale flags. They lashed their craft to its rusted ribs. Kai climbed first, boots slick on algae. Inside, the cargo hold yawned like a cathedral. Crates stacked to the ceiling, some smashed, contents spilled, bottles, scrap, moldy cloth. The air reeked of brine and rot. Sam slipped in behind him, whispering, "Treasure." "Or teeth," Jax growled, pulling Mira up. The first body waited just beyond the hatch. Bloated, skin sloughing in sheets, chest torn open as if by claws or desperate hands. Barnacles dotted its arms, shells opening and closing lazily. Its mouth was rimmed in black, lips gone. It twitched, then sat up with a snap of spine. "Back!" Mira hissed, but Sam froze. The thing lurched forward, seawater spilling from its lungs. Kai swung his club. The blow caved its temple, bursting bone and flesh like a melon. Dark fluid sprayed across the crate wall. The body twitched, jaw still working, teeth clacking. Sam gagged. "It's still—" Jax stomped down, boot crushing its jaw into splinters. Teeth scattered like shells. "Never give them half a kill. You make it whole." Feeding deck. They moved deeper. Corridors slick with slime. Graffiti scrawled on walls. Arrows, prayers, curses. Meridian saves smeared in black. From the galley came a sound. Wet. Rhythmic. Feeding. Kai eased forward. The galley door was jammed half open. Through the gap, 3 figures hunched over a carcass. They tore with their hands, shoving meat into mouths, gulping seawater with it. Flesh was half-rotten fish. Maybe not fish. One lifted its head. Its skin flensed away in strips, eye sockets crawling with crabs that scuttled out and back again. Kai shoved the door wide. The figures snapped toward him, throats bubbling brine. They charged. The first hit Mira. She jammed her cleaver up through its mouth, splitting skull through the palate. It burst like fruit, chunks sliding down her arm. She shoved it off, apron soaked. Jack swung his wrench into the second. The blow smashed collarbone and shoulder to pulp, but it kept clawing. He swung again, catching its jaw. Teeth shattered and flew, embedding in the wooden wall with a sharp patter. It slumped, chest leaking black water. The third lunged for Sam. The boy shrieked, ducked. Kai brought his club down, splitting its nose into a crater. It staggered, jaws clacking, until Jax finished it with a boot that crushed the skull into paste. The deck stank of bile and iron. Sam clung to Kai's leg, shaking. They don't stop. Kai pulled him close. Neither do we. The hold below. They scavenged tins of food sealed in wax, tools, a cracked radio, but deeper in the hold they found worse. A row of chained bodies, gaunt, pale, throats torn. Shackles suggested they'd been penned. Among them, one stirred. A woman's eyes fluttered open, milky and blind. Lips peeled back in a hiss. She lunged against her chain, tearing skin from her wrists, frothing brine. The sound was a scream dragged underwater. Sam whimpered. Mira raised her cleaver. Mercy! One swing. The chain rattled. The body slumped. The galley fell silent, but for the creak of the ship and drip of brackish water. Drift continues. They dragged crates back to their raft. As dusk fell, gulls circled, crying like lost children. The ocean was calm, but the water stank, as if the sea itself was rotting. Mira wiped gore from her arms. Blue Meridian! Those bodies! They were testing, feeding. Jack spat into the sea. Then they fed the ocean too. Kai looked at Sam, pale and trembling, clutching a dented can of beans like gold. He laid a hand on the boy's shoulder. We keep moving, always forward. Behind them, the ghost raft creaked. From inside, something knocked. Slow, deliberate, as if the ship itself had learned the rhythm. Chapter 5, The Crown. The Crown wasn't a palace, but the barons made it one. A fortress of welded barges and stacked shipping containers, painted black and gold, bristling with antennae and steel spikes. A crooked tower rose at its center, topped with a flare that spat smoke and light. From the sea, it looked like a rotten tooth crowned in fire. Inside, there would be food, fuel, maps, and tools. The bones a small group could use to buy freedom. Outside, there were guards with pipes and cleavers, and beneath, the infected pressed like creditors, patient and hungry. Jax crouched low on their lash raft, wrench across his knees. His face was grim, blood still crusted from the ghost ship. We hit fast. No speeches, no warnings. We take what we need and cut out before the whole place burns. Kai flexed his grip on the club. They'll kill us on sight. They'll kill us if we wait, Mira snapped. Her cleaver gleamed dark. The scorch mark on her arm still wept under its bandage, but her voice didn't flinch. Sam clutched his crowbar tight, knuckles white, lips thin. I'm not staying behind. Jax grinned without humor. Good, then you'll learn tonight. Breach. They came in from the underside, climbing rusted ladders slick with algae. The crown loomed above, walls patched from cargo panels. Ropes swayed, pulleys creaked, floodlights swept decks. Now, Jax hissed. They climbed fast, hands bleeding on rust, boots slipping. Sam darted up like a wiki boy, quick and wiry. The first guard never saw them. Jax's wrench smashed into his jaw, bone and teeth exploding in a spray of red and white. The body crumpled, blood gurgling from a split windpipe. The second shouted, but Mira was faster. Her cleaver bit deep into his throat, opening it ear to ear. A fountain sprayed across the steel wall, hot and steaming. He clutched the wound, gargled, collapsed. They slipped inside. The alarm. The horn bellowed almost instantly, a deep, guttural roar. Floodlights flared. Enforcers poured onto decks, machetes flashing. From below, the knockers stirred. The sea boiled. Bloated shapes clawed up ropes and ladders. Barnacle-encrusted faces split with snapping jaws. Seawater poured from mouths as they shrieked like drowning animals. The raid became a three-way war. Blood on steel. Kai swung his club into an enforcer's skull. Bone collapsed, splitting scalp. The man dropped twitching, blood pumping hot arcs. Sam ducked a chain swing and rammed his crowbar upward, the hooked end punching through a man's jaw and into his tongue. The enforcer screamed wetly, blood spraying, until Sam ripped it free. Half the man's face came with it. He fell choking. "Good!" Jax roared, slamming his wrench into a zombie's chest. Ribs collapsed inward with sharp cracks. The thing still snapped, so he smashed its skull, spraying black fluid and gray matter. Mira hacked her cleaver down into another's shoulder. The arm dangled by threads of tendon, swinging uselessly. She kicked it back, blade buried deeper, until the upper body tore in half with a wet rip. The deck became a charnel house. Enforcers screamed as zombies dragged them down, tearing bellies open, intestines slapping wet across steel. The tower. "Tower!" Jax shouted, pointing to the flare-spitting smoke. "Supplies will be there." They fought upward, bodies piling behind them. Kai's arms burned. Sam stumbled, slipping on blood. Kai dragged him up, shoved him forward. Halfway, a bloated mutant lurched from a stairwell. Its skin split as it lunged, spilling writhing eels from its chest. The stench was sulfur and bile. Kai gagged. Jax grabbed it by the throat and slammed its head against the railing until the skull burst like a pumpkin. Black paste sprayed. The eels writhed, snapping, until Mira stomped them into slime. At the top, they reached the tower. Crates stacked high. Fuel, tins of food, maps sealed in tubes. Gold. "Load fast!" Mira barked. Sam stuffed cans into a sack, eyes wild. Jax hefted a fuel drum onto his shoulder. Kai grabbed maps, hands shaking. Below the deck was a slaughterhouse. Enforcers fighting back-to-back with zombies, screams ripping the night. Fire. Then the flare caught. Whether by stray spark or fuel splash, fire roared up the tower. Black smoke curled into the sky. Heat licked their faces. "We're out!" Jax bellowed. They cut ropes, hauling loot onto a lash raft. Zombies swarmed the decks, ripping men apart, tearing limbs with meaty pops. A Baron screamed orders until an infected latched onto his leg and pulled him down. His scream ended in a choking gurgle as teeth sank into his gut, spilling intestines across the boards. Kai shoved Sam into the raft. Mira leapt, apron aflame, smothering it with her arm. Jax hacked the last rope, and they drifted free. Behind, the crown burned, black and gold collapsing. Silhouettes writhed against the flames, men and monsters locked together, tearing each other apart. Sparks rained into the sea. Kai looked back, chest heaving. Victory or just another rope tightening, he couldn't tell. Chapter 6. The Loom. The crown's ashes drifted on the tide behind them, a column of black smoke clawing into the sky. But fire wasn't enough to erase the dead. By morning, the lash raft groaned under their weight and supplies, every board reeking of brine and smoke. "They'll come for us," Kai said, crouched on the lashings. His shirt was torn, the bite on his shoulder leaking pus that burned in the salt air. "Not just them," Jax muttered. He sat with his wrench across his lap, his bandaged legs stiff and wet with blood. He nodded toward the water. The surface shifted with pale shadows. The knockers followed the noise. Mira bound her burned arm with fresh cloth, teeth clenched. "Then we stand. Better to fight on our feet than drown tied to ropes." Sam clutched his crowbar, eyes sunken but hard. He hadn't let it go since the crown. The raft rocked gently, too gently. The sea was holding its breath. The first wave. It began with fingers. Bloated hands slipped through lash gaps, nails catching rope, then arms, then faces. The first body forced itself between barrels, ribs snapping with wet cracks as it squeezed. Its skin split along its chest, spilling gray water and slick strands of intestine. Its face pressed through, barnacles pulsing at its cheek. Kai swung his club. The skull cracked like driftwood, spraying black gore. Jax wrenched the head free and hurled it overboard. More came, dozens of them. One dragged itself by its guts, intestines slapping the deck like ropes. Mira's cleaver hacked its forehead open, blood spraying her eyes. It kept clawing until she split its skull in two and kicked the twitching halves into the sea. Sam shrieked, crowbar swinging wild. The hook buried itself in a skull. He pulled, tearing bone loose, blood soaking his hands. His scream broke into a sob, but he swung again, spraying gore. Siege of flesh. The raft tilted under their weight. Barrels creaked, ropes groaned. The sea churned with bodies. Jack swung his wrench down, crushing skulls to pulp. Blood sprayed across his face. A corpse latched onto his ankle, teeth sinking through bandages. He roared, smashing until its head burst into paste. Kai's club shattered another's jaw. The teeth flew, tongue wagging loose, the head still snapping. He crushed it again, bone shards embedding in the deck. Mira hacked at arms and torsos, cleaver rising and falling in sprays of gore. A zombie latched onto her burned arm, teeth sinking deep. She screamed, cleaver slicing its head halfway off. The jaw hung by sinew, gnashing still. Jax booted it away, skull popping under his heel. Sam swung at everything, shrieking, splattering brains across the lashings. His crowbar stuck in a skull. He wrenched it free, tearing half the face with it. Blood gushed, painting him red. The raft dipped lower. The horde didn't stop. Firestorm. Fuel! Jax bellowed. He seized a canister, smashed it open with his wrench. Fuel poured across lashings. Kai lit a flare and dropped it. The deck ignited. Flames raced along rope and barrel. Zombies shrieked, skin blistering, fat bubbling. The stench was hell itself. Burnt flesh, salt, and smoke. Some crawled forward anyway, burning, flesh dripping in chunks. Mira hacked them down, cleaver splattering charred gore. A flaming corpse lunged onto Sam. He screamed, shoving the crowbar into its throat. Teeth shattered, the iron bursting from the back of its skull. Flames caught his shirt, but Kai beat it out with his hands. Another toppled onto Kai, jaws snapping, pus spilling onto his face. He jammed his club up through its mouth. The skull burst, spraying hot brain across his chest. The fire spread too far. Barrels popped in the heat, ropes snapping. The raft groaned as flames ate it alive. Abandon. Off, Jax roared, dragging Sam. Swim! A zombie lunged onto Kai's back, teeth sinking into his shoulder wound. He slammed it into steel, its skull cracking. He tore it off, half its jaw ripping free, teeth still embedded in his flesh. Mira fought free of another, cleaver hacking spine into splinters. Blood sprayed across her, sizzling in the fire. They leapt one by one into the sea. Behind them, the raft collapsed into fire. Zombies burning, shrieking, sinking. The sea bubbled with corpses, flames reflecting in their dead eyes. The loom. They clung to the side of a half-sunken cargo hull nearby, gasping. Blood and brine dripped from every inch of them. Sam sobbed quietly, crowbar still in hand. Jax's leg bled freely, his face twisted in pain. Mira's burned arm shook. Kai's bite throbbed, black veins spreading. The sea below boiled with corpses, burned and bloated, still clawing upward. The crown is ash, Mira whispered, and the sea won't stop feeding. Jax spat blood. Then we hold here, or we die. They hauled themselves onto the tilted deck, broken steel beneath them, water pounding against its side. Below, the knocking returned, louder than ever. They were alive, for now, but the sea was still hungry. Chapter 7. Blackwater Rising. The hull groaned under their weight, every wave bending steel that had already lost too many arguments with the sea. Rust bled down the tilted walls. The deck smelled of smoke, brine, and the sweet sour of old blood. They had survived fire and screaming and teeth. Now the silence was the part that wanted to finish the job. Sam sat with his back to a crate, crowbar hugged tight to his chest. He rocked without meaning to, whispering numbers under his breath, counting drips from a seam above his head, counting the knocks that came up through the metal like a bad heartbeat. Mira knelt by Jax, binding his shredded leg tighter. The cloth turned red-black almost as fast as she could wind it. Kai sat apart from all of them, his shirt torn at the shoulder, the bite swollen and glossy, heat coming off his skin like a small stove. The knock came again, slow, patient, not the slap of water or the scrape of rope. Something using their world as a door. "They'll smell it," Jax rasped, eyes on Kai's wound. Sweat slicked his temple. He looked like a man arguing with pain and losing on purpose. Kai shifted, the bite throbbing like a second pulse. "It didn't get deep." His voice was hoarse. "I broke its head before—" "A bite is a bite," Mira said, not unkindly. "We don't know how long you have." Sam's whisper sharpened. "He's not turning." Jack spat metal-tasting blood. "Fight and clean aren't the same word." No one answered. The hull did. It shivered under a swell, and the creak that followed walked the length of the deck like a person with a limp. They made rules because rules sounded like walls. No one slept alone. No one put bearskin to gaps. No rinsing with seawater. Eat a little. Drink less. Count the knocks. Don't name the faces you thought you saw in the rust. Night was only a darker kind of gray. The sea pressed up, and the dead pressed with it. Faces flattened against steel just below the grates, lips peeled back, milk eyes open. Some had no jaws at all, just tongues slapping at rust with wet patience. Others were swollen to bursting. Black water seeped from split seams in their skin and ran in thin lines down the plates. Mira woke to a drip on her cheek. She wiped it away and her fingers came back pink. A hand had forced through a drain hole by the door. Fingers first, then wrist. Skin scraped and peeling where it met the edge. The hand groped blindly, nails raking steel. She stood slowly, boots careful on slick deck, and brought the cleaver down. Bone splintered. The hand came loose. It writhed on the floor, fingers tapping madly until she chopped it into pieces small enough to forget. The stump below flexed and flexed, as if remembering what it had been sent to do. Sam whimpered. "They're inside." "Not yet," Mira said, but she didn't look at the drain again. They took turns sleeping badly. When it was Kai's watch, he sat cross-legged and counted the knocks aloud so they belonged to somebody. The fever dragged colors between the rivets, turned rust into faces. He saw his sister once in the sheen of oil by the hatch. Hair stuck to her forehead, eyes laughing like before the barons took her away. He reached, then remembered, and pulled his hand back as if from a stove. The vision stayed, patient, until the next wave bent the hull and smeared it away. He woke Jax for his turn and tried not to see the way Jax's pupils were blown big with pain. Jax never complained. Men like him saved words for when they cut. 2 knocks slow, Kai said. 1 fast, then nothing for a long time, then 2 again. Like a code, Jax said, like a tide learning numbers. Dawn spread itself grudgingly across the deck, a pale bruise of light. The sea didn't get brighter so much as less dark. Corpses floated in the lee of the hull, bumping and turning with the lazy love of drift. Crabs rode faces like crowns. A gull landed on a bloated chest, pecked once, and sank up to its beak in liquefying skin. It flapped away with a scream that had nothing to do with birds. "We need water," Sam said, voice sanded raw. His lips had cracked blue lines in them. "We need something." "We have a little," Mira said, lifting the jar they'd saved through the fire. "Sips. No more." Her burned arm trembled as she poured. She handed the jar to Sam first. He took a swallow and closed his eyes as if someone had said a good word over him. A dull thud rattled the deck plates. Then another. Not knocks. Impacts. The three of them froze and looked at the hatch to the short corridor that led into the dead ship's bowels. "Stay," Jax told Sam. "If it opens, you scream." He didn't have to say it. Sam's scream had learned everyone's name since the crown. Kai went anyway, because even sick men can be useful when there aren't enough healthy ones. The corridor stank of wet insulation and dead electricity. Rust flaked under his palm in curls. They passed a door with a rectangle painted around a missing sign. They passed a locker burst open by salt and time. A shoal of mold drifted there like a tiny cloud. At the corridor's end, a bulkhead had bowed inward. Something on the other side hit it again. The indentation breathed. Mira lifted her cleaver. Jax shifted his stance and raised the wrench. The next impact drove a crease across the metal. A rivet popped with a gunshot crack. Black water spit through and ran down Kai's shin. He did not move. "Kai," Mira said. "I know." He stepped back. "On three." They didn't get to three. The bulkhead tore. A waist-high gap ripped open, and something squeezed through sideways, shoulders dislocating with a wet pop. It had only half a body to bring. The spine ended in a tassel of shredded meat, but its arms were long as ropes, fingers like hooks. Jax met it first, wrench smashing down. The forearm snapped, bones punching through skin and turning the hand into a hooked club. It swung anyway, raking Jax's thigh and tearing cloth and fresh blood together. Mira's cleaver hammered the skull. The first blow broke the brow, the second left a valley, the third split it, and a wash of gray and black poured out over her boots. The torso scrabbled with one good hand, dragging itself forward by its ribs. Kai raised his club and broke knuckles one by one until the hand made only the memory of a fist. Mira put the blade through the base of the skull and levered. The body went still. The corridor did not. More hands pressed at the tear. Fingers quested, nails scraping, skin parting on jagged steel. One face wedged through to the cheekbone, eye bulging through the gap, watching nothing and everything. The eye ruptured when it touched a shard and ran like ink. The mouth opened, and brine poured in a thin rope that swung side to side with the motion of the hull. "Back," Jax said. "We need weight." They hauled a locker sideways, shoved it against the breech, then a length of pipe, then the corpse itself as chocking. The improvised dam stuttered under another impact, and then learned how to hold. Water hissed thinly through the seams. They limped back to the deck. Sam was where they had left him, but smaller somehow, as if fear had eaten some of his edges. "You screamed in your chest," Kai said. Sam nodded. "I didn't want it to hear me." He gave Sam the club because the boy's hands were shaking less than his own. Sam tucked the crowbar in his belt and took the club two-handed, like a bat in a game no one would ever play again. They tried to make the hull kinder. They found a tub of old sealant, thick as tar and stinking of fish oil, and smeared it into seams they could reach with cloth wrapped over their hands. They hung a skirt of torn tarp over the lowest run of plates so the dead would find canvas instead of the easy lattice of ladder rungs the ship offered. They sounded like carpenters, drunk on blood, muttering about edges and lines and what would take a nail. "Storm comin'," Jax said, head cocked. "Hear that?" At first there was only the usual, wind feeling its way around a battered thing, sea talking to itself. Then a deeper note pressed in under everything, a pressure you felt in the soft parts of your head. The horizon wore a smeared line the color of bruised peach. Clouds gripped it in a fist. The air smelled like a battery. "Squall line," Mira said. "We need a higher place." "There isn't one," Kai said, and the truth of it sat down with them like a fifth person. By afternoon, the sky had found its anger. Swells shouldered the hull and lifted it as if to test what would break with the least effort. The tarp skirts snapped and whipped. Hands pawed at it from below, pushing, pressing. Sometimes a finger hooked through a seam and pulled. The fabric popped a stitch but held mostly. A pale mouth appeared under the tarp at one point, teeth worrying cloth like a dog at a rag until the cloth tore and the mouth filled with water. It gnashed anyway. They ate a little. Dried fish that tasted of creosote, a strip of something that had once been fruit and now was only memory. They passed the jar and each took a sip and looked away while the others swallowed. Kai's fever came in waves. In one, he was here, hearing the varnish in Jax's voice when he lied about how much his leg hurt. In the next, he floated 6 inches above his body, watching himself try not to shiver. He kept his hands out of the gaps. He kept seeing the word meridian stenciled across the sky, like a god that had already stopped believing in people. "Tell me if I stop making sense," he said. "Promise me." Mira pressed her palm to his forehead, counted under her breath as if she could tally the fever into obedience. "You always make sense," she said. "That's the problem." Toward evening, the dead changed their song. The knocks didn't come in singles or doubles anymore. They came together, a drum line, 1,000 wet hands keeping time across the steel. The rhythm marched up and down the plates, found the drain, the ladder rungs, the new seam, the locker they had braced, tested each as if it were reading Braille. Jack's mouth went thin. Somebody taught them to listen. "Us," Mira said. "We taught them with our living. We made ladders. We made rules. They learned both." "We can leave," Sam said, sudden, desperate. "We can get off. We can swim for—" He swallowed the word land like a fishbone. "Something." "We swim for what crawls," Jack said gently, which made it worse. Darkness came fast with the squall. Rain hit in sheets, warm at first, then needle cold. The tarp skirt ballooned and slapped. The knockers surged, hands appearing in clusters under the edge, wrists working like the legs of spiders. A head shouldered up under the tarp and wore it like a hood, teeth whirring the hem until the cloth tore and the head popped free with a wet baby's cry. Sam hit it so hard the skull ricocheted off the plate and back into the water with a slurp. 3 more pressed up where it had been, blind mouths working, brine drooling. Lightning stitched the sky open. For a second, the whole ocean was a flat of hammered white metal, and the dead were coins pressed up from below. Thunder rolled across the water and arrived late, as if it had had to swim. The hull vibrated with the sound. Something in the locker room down the corridor answered with a clatter as bolts crept. They huddled in the lee of a bulkhead and rode the blows. Now and then, a body made it over the rail and thumped onto the deck like a sack of wet rice. Those they killed quick. Jax with the wrench, Mira with the cleaver, Sam with both hands on the club and his eyes squeezed nearly shut. Kai used the knife he had taken from a dead enforcer's boot to open throats and stand on heads until the ocean pulled them back. He could not tell if the shaking was the hull or his own bones. Between strikes, they listened. The dead breathed through water. It was a sound like a bellows full of mud. The storm breathed too, long and low, and you could almost believe the noises were talking to each other. Sometimes the knocks fell into the thunder and rose out of it again changed, as if thunder had taught them a new way to count. When the worst of the squall had passed, the sea flattened out into a slick, black road. The rain softened to a whisper. The tarp skirt clung to the plates in damp surrender. Steam rose from the dead where lightning had kissed them. The sky hung too low and close, as if the storm meant to sit on their chests until they consented to stop. They checked the brace in the corridor again and found the locker had shifted an inch and the pipe half that. The corpse had wedged deeper into the gap, its ribs crushed to a lattice. When Kai touched it with the toe of his boot, a trickle of bubbles leaked from the mouth and the mouth smiled. He didn't kick it again. Back on deck, Sam sat with the crowbar across his knees and watched Kai the way a child watches the horizon when he knows a parent isn't coming home. "If you start to, I'll tell you," Kai said. He hoped he would. Jax leaned his head back against the bulkhead and watched the shape of the sky. "When I ran with the Crown," he said, voice dull, "we had a rule for turning. You watch the eyes, the way they stop finding the thing you want them to. You add weights to a body before you put it to sea so it doesn't come back mad about the farewell. You don't say names because names are hooks." Mira looked at him. "Did you follow your rule?" Jax's laugh had gravel in it. "Sometimes." The water in the jar was almost gone. They each put a drop on their tongues and let it sit there until it decided to leave. The taste made Sam cry without making a sound. The quiet did not last. It never does. A new sound arrived, from deeper than the knocks and older than the storm, a groan that did not belong to weather or wood. The hull dented inward 3 hands' width along a seam they had not touched. The steel made a noise like a sigh, and then like a scream. "The bilge," Mira said. "Below." They pried up a plate set loosely near the stern and looked down into the ship's metal belly. Black water seethed in the space there, up to a rib that should have been dry. In it, pale shapes moved, arms feeling, faces turning, hair stirring in the thin slosh. The dead had found the inside way. They had been knocking on the bottom only so they could learn where to lift from within. Wire, Jack said. Rags. Anything that plugs. They fed cloth into seams with the ends of tools, hammered wedges, cursed and begged. For a breath the water listened. Then it shouldered the rags aside like a big man walking through a narrow market, and brought with it a hand that had learned how to fit where people did not. The hand caught Jax's wrist and held. It squeezed. The bones grated. Jax bared his teeth but did not yell. Mira chopped at the hand until it let go and fell back with a soft, wet complaint. Sam crawled backward, heels leaving smears. They're under everything. That's where we live, Kai said, surprised by the way his mouth found humor and how much it hurt when it did. They set the plate back and sat on it. They were out of heavy things to lay on top. They were out of good ideas that didn't sound like lies. Rain returned in a drizzle. With it came a smell, sharp, electrical, and underneath it, the sick sweet of meat gone chemical. Bodies bumped against the hull with a knock that had rhythm now, and measure and purpose. Each time one struck, the seam at the deck's edge ticked a little wider. Each tick let a thin bead of black water show and withdraw like a tongue thinking about a word. Kai's fever climbed another rung of the ladder. The world puckered at the edges. He looked at the line where sea met sky and thought he saw it bulge, as if something were pushing up from below. He blinked, and it was only horizon again, the kind the sea wears when it is practicing being empty. What if this is all meridian counts for noon, he said, and his voice sounded like it had been left in the sun too long. A line we put in the middle and say everything is measured from here. Mira brushed hair from his eyes with fingers that shook. Then we moved the line. Thunder mumbled far off like someone remembering a joke and not wanting to tell it. The dead answered with their hands. The last light went with no ceremony. Dark reasserted its right to the water. The drum beat of the knocks came closer together, like a cavalry closing. The seam by the edge hiccuped once and then ran, a hairline crack bleeding something that wasn't rain. Jax rolled his shoulders. He lifted the wrench and let it rest on his thigh. If they come through, he said, we make a pile. We make it fast. We make it tall enough to be a wall. Sam nodded as if that were the sort of instruction you could learn by doing it once. Mira lifted the cleaver. Her face had turned to bone and promise. Kai wiped his palms on his trousers, touched his own throat with 2 fingers until he could feel the beat there, and know that for the moment it was still his. The hull bowed. The bolt by the seam screamed and sheared. A panel flexed and did not return. Through the gap that opened, black water swelled like a tongue and licked the deck. Black water is rising, Mira said softly, and for once nobody corrected anyone. The hands came through first. Chapter 8, Meridian Noon. The hands came through first. They groped along the seam and found purchase on anything that wasn't sea. A bolt head, a ragged lip of steel, Jax's boot. Mira chopped until the fingers were necklace beads on the deck, and still the seam breathed black water. Out, Jax said through his teeth. There's a skiff on the lee chain. Now. They didn't argue. Sam shouldered the crowbar. Kai shoved his shoulder under Jax's arm. Mira dragged the kit bag by its strap. The hatch to the outer ladder was a mouthful of rain and rust. Below, the emergency skiff knocked the hull like a patient animal trying to be let in. They fell into it more than climbed. The skiff took their weight and complained but held. Sam slashed the painter with his crowbar's hook. Push! He cried, and they shoved off with hands and feet as the seam behind them gave a long, relieved tear. The hull opened like a throat. Water and bodies spilled in a single, delighted rush. Pale faces popped up where steel went down, mouths wide, eyes rolled white. Hands pawed the air in blessing or accusation. It didn't matter which. The ship settled by the stern and let go of its last breath in a boil of bubbles that smelled like rot and copper coins. Row, Mira said. Her burned arm shook, but she rowed anyway with a splintered plank. the motion sawing pain out of her voice and leaving command behind. Kai pulled, fever sparking across his vision in little white insects. Jax used the wrench as an oar and bit his mouth closed when the leg fired. By noon, the sea showed them a shape that did not belong to garbage. A platform floated there, honest and manufactured. Clean steel, white panels, solar rigs bent, but still catching light. Logos half scrubbed by salt repeated in a pattern that made the skin remember the pit. Wave inside a circle. Dots around it like a cheerful constellation. Blue Meridian, Sam breathed. Hope and fear said the name together. They came alongside a landing ladder that had forgotten to rust right. The skiff thumped the floats. Up, Jack said, first despite the leg, because first was his habit. Sam followed like a wiki squirrel. Mira got Kai to his feet and made him climb by saying nothing, and staying close enough that falling was her problem too. The deck felt wrong under their boots. Flat, whole, indifferent to the sea. The air smelled of antiseptic over rot, like a butcher had washed the room and left the meat. The wind ran a clean hand across the white walls and found no story there to tell. Inside the first container, the light was a low green hum. Batteries still worked just enough to be resentful about it. Glass tanks lined the walls, most shattered, their lips crusted with salt. Laminated notes were taped above them in tidy rows, the plastic curling. Mira peeled one down with a gloved hand and read, voice small in the sterile space. Series C, planktonic modifiers, ingestion at 0.02% salinity, subject mortality, 83%. Survivors exhibit aggressive motor function, cranial necrosis, compulsive feeding behavior. Secondary, dermal colonization by calcareous organisms. She swallowed. Barnacles. Another sheet. Vector uptake through gill analogs and filament feeders. Human compatible via microabrasion pathways. Mira stared until the words blurred. Cuts, she said. They learned to love our smallest doors. Down a corridor, a locker room sat untouched. Bright suits on hooks, a corkboard with a cartoon plankton and a hard hat. Its glossy eye pinned by a rusted scalpel. The refrigerated chamber hummed. Frost laced the window. Mira pressed her palm to the glass and felt a machine trying to keep a promise past its deadline. Power's not dead, she said. It's stubborn. Jax levered the door. The seal let go with a suction sigh and a whiff of air colder than truth. Pods stood in 2 rows like pews. Some held animals, some people. In one, a pig hung in straps, torso reopened and restapled, white mats wrinkled across exposed organs. The next pod held a man. Big, thoughtless stitches crossed his chest. A catheter trailed to a gloved hand on the floor. His eyes were sewn open. Tiny crabs owned the sockets. At the far end, a pane showed a spiderweb of cracks. A woman floated inside, hair drifting like weeds, skin thin enough to show veins gone black. Her eyes slid open as if the movement cost money. Her hand rose and tapped the glass once, twice. The crack widened with each knock like a map filling in. Out, Jack said at the hinge of a breath. The glass let go. The woman spilled forward with her water, a collapse of cold and meat that slapped the metal. She hit on her knees and tried to stand, and forgot how. Her mouth opened. Brine poured and a sound came out like a baby and a drain fighting over the same pipe. Her surgical seam parted. A length of blackened intestine uncoiled and touched the floor. Kai didn't wait for pity to make a bad decision. He stepped in and brought the club down. The first blow made a bowl of her temple. The second took away the rim. Mira's cleaver came from the side and found the place between skull and spine where bodies agree to leave. The blade stuck. Jack stamped her back flat until bones were a map of islands under his boot, and then nothing at all. Silence afterward had the shape of a confession. Black fluid pooled and moved toward a floor drain, with purpose. The compressors hummed like old men at the back of a church who don't know how to stop attending. Mira's hands shook as she pulled a file free from a plastic bin beside the door. The label said, Phase Meridian Noon. Inside were pages printed with the confidence of people who believed paper still owned the world. She read without deciding to. Deployment scenario, conflict zones with high civilian casualty, primary deliverable, hydroclean of petrochemical spills and organic disposal. Deniable vector. Expected civilian impact. Minimal, defined as below threshold for inquiry. She turned a page, her mouth hardened. Secondary observation, human compatibility higher than projected, elevated aggression, post-uptake, enhanced coordination in high salinity environments. Sam's voice was paper-cut thin. They fed the ocean so it would eat us. They fed the ocean because oil was expensive to hate and bodies were expensive to hide, Jack said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. A monitor blinked once and died. The ceiling speaker crackled. Phase noon, proceeding ahead of, then a compressed scream and a long clatter. Silence took the rest. Kai's fever made the letters dance. Still, he found enough sense to pull map tubes from a rack and stare until the lines stopped arguing. Currents, drifts, ghosts of supply routes. He tucked two in his belt the way a man tucks a prayer in his sleeve. Medical, Mira said. Find it. They did. Cabinets of sealed dressings, real antibiotics in tiny brown vials, scalpels in paper like candy. Mira nearly cried. We can buy time, she told Kai's shoulder and Jax's leg. Time is the only currency that ever mattered. Nobody has enough. At the hall's end, a window taught them the sea's honesty. Faces rose in ones and twos, then a congregation. Hands patted, then pressed, then pounded in unison. The glass boomed. They hear us, Sam said. He lifted the crowbar without meaning to. They hear the idea of us, Mira said. We make a shape the water can add up. They moved to the control room because rooms with more buttons feel like plans. Most screens were dead. One looped men in white pushing a cart and laughing. Another showed the pilings, cable vines, and a shadow that didn't belong to architecture. They found more papers. Gill uptake confirmed in anchovy, menhaden, comb jellies, crossover to humans via dermal microabrasion and mucosal exposure. Adjuvant chlorine reduces but does not eliminate. Thermal deactivation incomplete in high-load scenarios. Mira closed her eyes. Boil anyway, she whispered, to the past that couldn't hear her. The pounding thickened into music. It found the shape of a march. The floor vibrated. Dust shivered out of light fixtures. Somewhere, a shelf surrendered and spilled metal into the hum like cymbals. Supplies and out, Jack said. We don't sleep here. They moved faster. Food tins into sacks, medical kits into Mira's bag, map tubes in Kai's belt. Sam found solar blankets and flares. We can make the sky tell a story, he said, then flushed. In the main lab, a manhole drain breathed slow as tide. The grate trembled with each exhale. No, Mira told it. Not now. Glass shattered in the corridor behind them. A pane in the observation hall had given up. Brine and bodies spilled through, arms first, then faces. The first head through wore a mask of skin that had sloughed off and now hung from one ear like a rag. Its teeth were tiny shells embedded in purple gum. It opened its mouth and a thread of jellyfish slopped out, stinging in a lazy coil. Kai met it with the club and felt bone go to gravel. Jack smashed a wrist that had gotten too clever with the latch. Sam jammed his crowbar into a mouth and pried until the jaw separated with a pop and swung by tendon like a door. The corridor turned to slurry. Back to the inner door, Jax barked. He and Mira slammed the controls. Hydraulic seals tried to remember their oaths. The door descended stuttering, met an arm, cut to humerus, kept going. The severed hand kept scrabbling along the floor by itself until Mira stamped it flat and nailed it to the tile with the tip of the cleaver like a beetle in a child's collection. They bought themselves a minute and spent it like saints. Mira injected Kai's shoulder at 3 points, antibiotics and something to burn the fever's nest. She packed Jax's bite with medicated gauze and wound the leg with a bandage that stayed white for 5 heartbeats, and then learned where it lived. She scrubbed her own burn with saline and bit her lip until blood made her honest again. What if it's already in the blood? Sam asked, voice too old. What if we're... Then we spend what we have getting off this box, Jax said. Nobody gets cured on a slab. The inner door's seals wailed. The dead beyond were learning the gasket's geometry. They pounded in a new rhythm. 3 quick, 1 long, 3 quick, 1 long. The bolts vibrated. At the glass wall overlooking the deck, more faces stacked until the view was a collage of skin and eye and teeth. Some were wrong in new ways. Arms lengthened like cables, fingers webbed with translucent film that fluttered like veils. Barnacles studded cheeks in neat spirals, opening and closing with a disquieting precision. Enhanced coordination, Mira said as if reading from the file again. They made for the exit with sacks heavier than hope. Outside, wind had freshened. The skiff knocked at the floats where they had left it, an anxious dog. The first two made it down the ladder. Kai put his foot on the top rung, and the glass behind them screamed. He turned without wanting to. The observation panes crazed and then let go. A wall of bodies hit the lab like a wave wearing people for foam. Go! Mira shoved him so hard his good shoulder crunched. He went. Jax came last because that was how his bones were wired. As he put his boot on the second rung, a hand shot out of the deck drain and took his ankle. It pulled with the vindication of gravity. Jax didn't shout. He leaned down and hit its wrist until the bones powdered and the hand softened to a bag of joints. It didn't let go. It never does. He pried his boot free, left the hand on the laces like a trophy, and dropped into the skiff so hard the boat burped water over its gunnel. They pushed off as the lab's deck filled with bodies that didn't know why they wanted what they wanted, only that the wanting owned them. A man with half a face and a blue meridian badge still on his coat tumbled into the water and swam with a neat frog kick learned in a pool long ago. He hit the skiff's side and gnawed wooden splinters. Sam drove the crowbar through his ear and out the other like stitching. The body went slack. The tool came back red. The sea around the platform boiled. Something down by the pilings moved that was bigger than bodies and worse than plans. The skiff rocked on a lift that came from below and not from tide. The dead in the water stopped clawing for a heartbeat and seemed to listen. The platform answered with a long, quiet shudder that traveled up the ladder like a warning written in metal. Back inside, Mira said, and hated herself for saying it. Inside holds a minute, Jack said. Out holds nothing. The glass at the far end blew in, and a spray of shards reached them like rain. Cuts opened along Sam's cheek. He put his hand there and his palm came away seamed and red. He looked surprised, as if he had thought perhaps he had no more blood to lose. They slewed the skiff along the rim, hunting mercy. A service hatch stood half open near a bank of tanks. There, Kai said, fever suddenly clear. They shoved the bow under, tossed the sacks up, then themselves, and hauled the skiff until it wedged in shade. The hatch opened to a narrow inspection gallery with thick panes into the main lab. Beyond, the dead boiled over benches. Something tall moved with slow authority, spine arched, arms too long. Barnacles across its scalp opened and closed in a spiral. Mira touched the glass with the heel of her hand and left a clean mark in the film of salt. We're not a lab anymore, she said. We're the experiment that got up. Then the result is this, Jack said, setting the wrench on his knee like a book he meant to finish. Out there is a meal. In here is a test. We pick the room we die in. Kai looked from the sacks to the map tube to the door at the end of the gallery that led deeper toward the control stacks and whatever else Meridian had thought it could keep above the waterline. His shoulder throbbed. The drugs moved under his skin like a new tide. He imagined a horizon that wasn't teeth. We don't die in either, he said. Not today. The glass in front of them flexed on a beat that did not belong to weather. Cracks traced across the pane in a pattern disturbingly close to the Meridian and Dot's logo. The first star of glass fell inward and rang on the grate by their boots like a tiny bell that believed in noon. Then the whole window began to fail. Chapter 9, The Stitch. The first pane went with a sound like ice snapping on a winter river. A hairline crack spidered across the lab's observation wall, traced by greasy smears of blood on the other side. Dozens of faces pressed to the glass. Bloated, barnacle-pocked, jaws gnashing. Knocks became hammer blows. The glass bowed, sighed, and held. Brace the doors, Jack said. They flipped tables, shouldered steel shelving, dragged anything heavy into a barricade. The lab air was already sour. Chemical rot layered over the stink of the woman they'd cut down in the cryochamber. Black water sheeted across white tile, carrying strips of flesh like kelp. Alarms blinked dumbly and died. Sam crouched, crowbar gripped white-knuckled. They're not stopping. They never do, Jax rasped, one hand clamped on his bleeding thigh. He lifted the wrench with the other, knuckles pale. Question is whether the glass breaks before we do. Mira bound her burned arm tighter, breath hissing. She stood near the main hatch, cleaver high. Then we make the break cost them. Kai leaned on the bench, fever bright, the bite on his shoulder slick with black seep. He pinched the club harder. Alive's the wrong word, what he said, and the wall burst. Breach. Bodies poured through like a flood. The first hit, face first. Its jaw shattered on tile with a wet crack. It rose anyway, teeth broken to chalk, gums pumping blood. Kai's club crushed its skull. Bone and gray slurry slapped the wall. He slipped in gore, swung again, reduced the head to pulp. Another climbed over it, stomach bloated, split along old stitches. Black rot slopped out, intestines unspooling across the floor. The stench hit like bad electricity. Mira met it with a throat-high chop. Vertebrae popped. The head dangled by tendon, jaws still click-clicking until her second hack sent it skittering. She booted the twitching body back into the press. Jax's wrench caved in a face. Teeth pattered across tile. Fingers latched his wounded leg, dug into torn flesh. He smashed down until the skull turned to soup and the grip let go. Sam screamed as one lunged, half its face gone, eye dangling on a string. He jammed the crowbar up the gullet. Iron burst out the back of the head in a spray of black brine. He gagged, yanked free, swung again. Teeth skittered like glass beads. White walls took red and kept it. Black water mixed with blood into a slick river. Corpses stacked, and more climbed the pile. "Fall back," Jax barked. "Bench line." They compressed to a choke point between benches. Steel legs hemmed the dead just enough to make killing faster. Mira's cleaver rose and fell. Kai's club did work meant for hammers. Sam stabbed and pried. Jax turned skulls into dark bowls. The surge slowed, then thickened again. The stitch. "We need the window blocked," Mira panted. "Now!" "With what?" Jax snarled. Kai's fever flickered through the room and found the answer. Spools of surgical tubing, coils of safety wire, a pneumatic stapler bolted to a post, the sort you'd use to fasten canvas to steel. "We stitch it," he said, "like they stitch their test subjects." They moved in frenzy. Jax broke skulls. Mira and Kai dragged wire across the shattered frame. Sam fed tubing through gaps. The stapler thwacked. Metal teeth bit steel and meat. The infected shoved in. The stapler pinned their torn cheeks to the frame, nailed forearms flat, stapled tongues by accident, and didn't apologize. A head wedged through. Mira split scalp and jaw. Kai stapled its cheek to the jam. It snarled, jaw working uselessly, pinned grotesque as festival bunting. Another got shoulders in. Jax smashed the head sideways to wedge it. Kai stapled shoulder, neck, lips, the wire stitching flesh to frame. Brine sprayed in a fine, bitter mist. In minutes, the breach filled with bodies. They thrashed and shrieked, but the wall held. Not steel, not glass, but a quilt of the dead, stapled and wired into place. Sam stared, trembling. "It's still moving." "Good," Jax said, wrench dripping. "It moves instead of us." The crawl space. The pounding didn't stop. More dead pressed from outside, hammering their own into the frame. Blood dripped from a dozen mouths, pattered steadier than rain. A new sound rose from below. A crawl space hatch at floor level flexed, then slammed open. Black water burped, hands hooked over the rim. Pale faces shoved up through the grate, jaws chewing steel. "They're in the ducts!" Mira shouted. Kai dropped to his knees. The first head forced through, skin tearing on grate bars, blood slicking its face. He brought the club down, skull collapsed. Brains washed into the crawl space. Another head took its place instantly. Sam rammed the crowbar through the grid, punched the jaw sideways, split teeth like porcelain. Blood sprayed hair thin across his cheek. Fingers found Sam's ankle, nails black, digging. He stomped. Bones popped. The hand held anyway. Jax ripped the grate free, slammed it down into the swarm like a bear trap. Bars punched through faces. Jaws bit metal and wouldn't let go, though their owners had lost the rest of the argument. Brine fountained. Mira leaned over the hatch and worked like a butcher, cleaver severing hands, splitting skulls. The crawlspace water turned tar black and sang with bubbles. "Wire it shut," Jack said. They heaved the grate back in place and twisted safety wire over every corner until their fingers bled. Below, mouths clacked like wind chimes made of teeth. The push. The stitched wall writhed, staples popped. A forearm tore loose and slapped wet to the floor, still clawing. Mira hacked it into quiet. The stapler hissed empty. "Out," Sam said, voice thin. "Out of staples." "Wire," Kai said, and threaded more, drawing edges tight until flesh puckered around the frame like a bad seam. The outer hallway boomed. Hydraulics squealed protest. The inner lab door bulged. Bolts ticked in their holes. The dead pounded in a rhythm. 3 quick, 1 heavy. Learned from somewhere and practiced until it sounded like thought. "Back line," Jax called again. They fell into positions by instinct now. Kai left, Jax right, Mira floating like a blade where the line thinned, Sam stabbing from low where taller fighters missed. The dead who found ways over benches died by inches. Hands first, then faces, then necks, a conveyor that fed on itself. A siren somewhere finally remembered its job and started to cry. It only made the timing worse. Respites that aren't. Silence came in a stutter. Not real, just a breath between waves. They used it like thieves. Mira hit Kai with antibiotics again, fresh dressing over the bite. She packed Jax's leg with medicated gauze until he hissed and set his jaw like a door. She scrubbed her burn with saline and swore into her teeth. She poured a capful of water for each of them. They let it sit on their tongues and pretended it could turn into more. The stitched barricade moaned. A pinned head gnashed air until the lower jaw tore free and clattered to the floor. The tongue flopped like a fish. Sam stared too long. "It's learning," he whispered. "They're learning." "They're remembering," Mira said. "That's worse." The duct howled, air pushed by bodies, not fans. The grate flexed. Wire sawed grooves into its frame. Teeth scraped. Metal sang. Jax limped to the tool wall, came back with a length of rebar, and jammed it across the grate, torquing it into place. "Make them eat that." Pressure. The inner door finally gave its first bolt. The sound was a ringing pop and a shiver in the floor. A thin line of black seeped under the seal and crawled out like a patient tongue. "Secondary lock?" Kai asked. Mira shook her head. "I think the secondary is run." Jax looked to the ceiling. Overhead, a service gantry spanned to the back corridor. He grunted, climbed the bench, reached up, hooked the wrench head over the gantry rail, tested it. "We can cross when it floods. Throw the sacks first." "We leave?" Sam asked, horror threaded with relief. "We move," Jax said. "Leaving's a luxury word." The bolt at the door head sheared. The slab bowed inward. Fingers pushed through the growing seam, split at the nails, kept pushing. Mira chopped. The fingertips fell like worms. More replaced them. Across the room, the stitched wall gave a groan, then settled. The bodies in it wedged tighter by the pressure behind. Blood squirted from pinholes in skin and painted the clean white with constellations. "Up," Jax said. They slung sacks. Sam clambered first. Light, fast, scared enough to be nimble. Kai followed, fever making the gaps look bigger than they were. Mira boosted him, then jumped. Cleaver between her teeth for a beat, and then back in her hand. Jax brought up the rear, wrench hooked, leg bad, mouth shut. Below, the inner door finally broke. Black water shouldered through, taking benches with it, lifting corpses, freeing hands that pulled more hands. Heads surfaced in the surge, mouths open, drinking the air with greedy surprise. "Go!" Mira snapped. They traversed the gantry, threw themselves into the back corridor, slammed a hatch, spun dogs into place. The hatch vibrated as bodies hit it. It held. For now. The long white hall. The back corridor was a long, sterile throat lit by failing strips. Windows offered views into smaller labs, each a different cruelty. A tank of comb jellies pulsed, each bell threaded with gray meat. A room of pumps thudded a slow heartbeat into thick hoses snaked down to the sea. A whiteboard read, Adjuvant. Chlorine reduces but does not eliminate in a square hand. They stopped in a supply alcove. Mirror-rated cabinets, dressings, tape, glucose tabs. Sam ripped open a foil and pressed a tablet to Kai's tongue. It melted sweetly. The sweetness hurt. Listen, Kai said. They did. Past the pounding on the hatch, past the duck scrape, past the pump thuds. Another sound moved. A deep, resonant churn, like a ship's screw far off or a throat clearing under the floor of the world. Pilings, Jack said, or something that owns them. We can't hold this side either, Mira said. We need an exit. Service gallery, Jack said, pointing at a faded plan taped to the wall. Leads to the south floats. Through the vertebrate lab, Mira read, and made a face like the word tasted bad. They ran hunched, sacks thudding, wet shoes squealing. The vertebrate lab door slid aside reluctantly. Inside, steel tables held restraints and stains. A camera hung crooked, lens cracked. The drain in the center of the room breathed in and out. Don't, Mira said to the drain, and they went around it wide. At the far end, a service gallery ran behind thick panes that looked into the main lab, now a blender of bodies, benches, gear. Between flashes of emergency strobes, something tall moved with long, deliberate strokes. Barnacles along its scalp opened and closed in spirals, tasting air. Keep going, Jack said softly, like not waking a thing. The gallery gives. Halfway down, the gallery window flexed. Hairline cracks traced the blue Meridian logo on the safety film. A flake fell inward and rang like a tiny bell on the grating. Sam whispered, "No." The pane bowed again. The cracks webbed into lace. "Run," Mira said. They sprinted. The window burst behind them, bodies and brine flinging in. Kai slipped, went to a knee. Sam hooked his arm and hauled, crowbar clanging. Jax turned mid-stride and braced, wrench up. Mira chopped a reaching hand at the wrist. Bones snapped like pencils. The hand pinwheeled and landed still clenching. They slammed the gallery door, through the bar, shouldered it while pressure built on the other side. The jam creaked. The bar bit deeper. "Not here," Jax grunted. "Not now." The pressure eased a breath, enough to wedge a pallet jack against the door. They backed away in steps you could count. The stitch holds for now. They ducked into a maintenance room, tools, spares, a coil of heavier wire, a bucket of rivets, a manual riveter that looked like a gun from an older, dumber war. Mira ripped her burned sleeve, stared at the angry flesh, then wrapped it tighter. Jax looked at his leg and did nothing because anything he could do was worse. Kai checked his shoulder, edges black, center angry red, fever humming. Sam's hands shook until he made them stop by counting to 10 and back. "Plan," Mira said. "South floats, service hatch, skiff if it's there, door if it isn't," Jack said. "If neither, we make one." "And if they've ringed the floats?" Sam asked. "Then we turn them into a ring around nothing," Jack said. It was bravado and also maybe true. A long, low roar rolled up through the structure. It made tools vibrate on hooks. The pumps answered with a cough. Somewhere behind them, something heavy failed with a clang and a hurt animal's whine. "They're pulling the pilings," Mira said, voice small, "or the pilings are pulling themselves." "Either way, we aren't here when it finishes," Jack said. They stepped back into the corridor. The door behind them bulged once more but held. The gallery beyond their bar roared like surf against rock. Black water seeped under the threshold and licked their boots. "Go," Mira said. They went. Chapter 10. Bright rind of the world. The stitched wall of bodies behind them had begun to sigh. Staples pinged one by one like tired insects. Every breath the lab took was a lie. Every shudder another confession. The pumps coughed, the pilings groaned, and the whole Blue Meridian platform felt as if it had remembered it floated, only because it hadn't found a reason to sink. "South floats," Jack said. "We're done being the test." They moved, sacks biting shoulders, weapons sticky in their hands. The corridor ran white and long, lighting strips buzzing. A painted line pointed towards service, and someone had written a tidy no before the word. The hatch opened on wind and wideness. Below, the south float sat at the platform's edge. dented drums bridged by a steel door, a ladder down, a rack of poles. The skiff they'd wedged under the hatch still tugged at its painter like a patient dog. "Move," Mira said. She lowered sacks first, food tins, medical kits, map tubes, wire, the manual riveter. Sam followed like a shadow, crowbar clanking. Kai went third. Jax came last because last was how he took his turns. They were on the floats when the lab shuddered so hard the catwalk above squealed. The knocking inside rose to a low roar. Bolts pattered into the water like hail. "Pilings," Jack said, as if naming them might make them behave. "What do we build?" Sam asked. "A boat," Kai said, voice raw. He pointed at stacked steel doors, a half-crumpled solar panel, a line of empty drums. Door for a spine, drums for ribs, panel for a deck, wire for tendons, rivets for bones. "And ballast?" Jax asked. Mira kept her eyes on the water. "We'll find ballast." They began. The steel door came down first. The manual riveter took 2 hands. Jax pulled it like he meant to break it, and it answered with a satisfying thunk. Sam threaded wire through drilled holes and twisted until joints sang tight. Kai lashed drums to the door with safety belts, counting strokes to keep his fever in the harness. Mira scavenged anything that would float or bind and stacked it within reach. Bodies boiled around the floats. Hands surfaced, found edges, groped. They chopped and smashed while they worked. The raft took shape. Jax leaned his weight on the spine, and it didn't argue. They added a second door at an angle and tied it like a collarbone. A face popped up by Sam's knee, mouth working as if to speak. He brought the crowbar down. The skull burst, and the body sank with a grateful sigh. He flinched only after and shook his hand to rid it of a tremor that had nothing to do with cold. "We need length," Jack said. "Panel," Mira said, and together they wrestled the cracked solar frame across the doors. The bolts sheared, but the frame held. They riveted where they could and wired where they couldn't. The deck's black glass, webbed with cracks, looked back at the sky as if asking what else it could bear. Kai stood. The ocean swayed under him. He held up the map tubes. "Stay," Sam said, not to a dog or a boat, but to a man whose eyes had begun to go too wide. "I'm here," Kai said. He tried to smile, his lips cracked. They pushed the raft off the floats. It floated badly, then better, then with a stubbornness that sounded like hope if you said it with your eyes closed. They tied the skiff alongside as a tender. Jax climbed aboard, leg hissing. Mira followed. Sam steadied the deck for Kai and shoved him up with a grunt. Something immense moved under them. Not a body, but a motion that owned the pilings. The platform dropped a hand's width. Water smashed the floats. A seam along the lab's underside opened and spat black water. "Go," Mira said. "Now." They pulled with salvage hooks. They paddled with doors ripped from hinge. They hauled on rope until their palms learned salt again. The raft nosed away. The dead in the water came with it, hands pawing, jaws working. One rose waist-high, intestines streaming like kelp, and slopped onto the deck. Jax met it with the wrench and caved its head until the deck cracked under it. Mira kicked the ruin off, and a second body rode it down, as if the first were a step. Kai fired the flare gun into the water between them and the swarm. The signal burned orange. For a second, the dead shrank from it. He fired again farther out, and the raft slid into the corridor of light the flares made until the light guttered and confusion returned. "Signal the sky?" Sam asked. "Later," Mira said. "Sky doesn't row." They rowed. The platform fell behind in pieces. The Blue Meridian logo, half peeled from the control stack, tore downwind and flopped into the sea. For a moment it lay flat, wave in a circle ringed by dots, and then the water ate it without complaint. The light changed. A hole opened in the cloud belly and showed a coin of pale sun. The raft turned toward it without anyone deciding. Kai squinted at a chart until the lines were less impossible. "Tide sets west," he said. "Wind wants south. There's a scattering here. Reefs, maybe broken atolls." He tapped where the printer had sketched a chain like stitches. "Rind." "Like fruit," Sam whispered. "Like something thin that makes you think of thick," Jack said. "Row," Mira said. They took turns with the poles and scrap oars, switching when breath got loud enough to scare birds. There were no birds. The sea was busy with the business of wanting. Once a shadow moved under them with edges. It went on too long. A low moan came from the direction of the pilings. The raft bobbed and did not flip. Sam began naming knots aloud: square, sheet bend, trucker's hitch, as if words could be a spell. Sometime in what should have been late afternoon, Kai dozed with his forehead against the panel and dreamed the dead had learned to hum in key. He woke to Jax nudging him with the wrench handle and did not swing. That was a victory. Drink, Mira said, and they each took a mouth the size of a coin. It was almost enough to remind them what drinking used to be. Land, Kai said, the word surprising his mouth. He pointed with the flare gun. On the horizon was a shape that was not only a cloud, low, uncertain. No, Jack said out of habit. Yes, Mira said out of something else. Sam laughed and then clapped his own mouth like a lid. They angled the raft with a jury-rigged sail. Solar blankets stretched between salvage poles and tied to the map tubes. The blanket bellied with what wind there was. The raft slid more than rode, a stubborn leaf. Bodies still followed. Not as many, not none. They trailed behind like mistaken saints. Sometimes one lunged and hit the door edge and was sent away by steel. Once a head without a body bobbed alongside long enough for Sam to name it and then unname it with the crowbar. Why fewer? Sam asked. Because dinner goes where it wants, Jack said. From behind rose a roar that wasn't wind. The platform lifted, settled, tilted, and broke its own shadow. Pilings snapped at the waterline. Glass fell with a glitter that felt like applause. Bodies poured off the edges and fluttered like bad confetti. Less chasing from that direction, Mira said. More from wherever people thought Meridian was bringing jobs. The horizon grew a fraction. They rode while Kai's shoulder burned sugar into sparks and Jax's leg hummed. They rode while Sam counted gulls that did not exist and then stopped. They rode while Mira said nothing at all. Night arrived all at once. The coin of sun dropped through a gap and made the panel glow. The dead who still followed fell back, not because darkness made them kinder, but because drifting into starlight seemed to have rules they didn't own. The knocks quieted into random arithmetic. They slept in shifts. Mira woke Kai to make sure his eyes still belonged to him. Kai woke Sam to hear him breathe a laugh out of a dream. Sam woke Jax because the wrench had slid toward the edge. Jax woke no one. Morning was fragile. The shape on the horizon was still there. Closer. It had textures, wrinkles, ridges. The air smelled different when the wind lifted its corner and passed it over their raft. It was still salt, but with another word in it, soil maybe, or rot that wasn't sea rot, the shy damp of leaves. Land, Sam whispered. He said it like an answer to a riddle asked by a bad god. It could be trash, Jack said. A raft like ours bigger, it could be a bloom. It could be enough to stop, Mira said. A reef of plastic bottles scrolled under them, bound by net so old the knots had turned to fossils. Fish skittered along it, bellies marked with little white scars like letters. A gull appeared, laughed once and veered away. They came up on the edge of the thing. It rose a foot or two, a rind laid on the sea, earth and not earth, sand captured in polymer mats, grit caught in net and root. Along its seam, mangrove saplings pretended mud was a story told by plastic. Their leaves were green in a way that hurt. Hold, Jack said. He hooked the wrench through a root and let the raft nose the rind. The door spine touched land with a sound like a spoon on a jar. Mira stared at the trees with a hunger that wasn't food. It's new. New enough to be wrong, Kai said, and then new enough to step on. They did not at first. The rind flexed under shore waves as if to say, I am still learning. Crabs hustled under the mat, their shells tattooed with company logos. Somewhere inside the mangroves, something moved with the slow confidence of a lizard that had seen floods come and go. Listen, Mira said. They did. The ocean's sounds changed when thrown at leaves. They came back softer. A fly sang a note that did not belong to the sea. A bird answered the gull with a sound that did not belong to cities. Far under it all, however, was a knock. Not on metal, on roots. They're here too, Sam said. Of course, Jack said. Kai stared at the line where Rhine became trees and trees became sky. His fever had stepped back a little to let him decide whether to die here or somewhere less picturesque. We pull the raft up, he said. Get above the tide. Build what people build when they decide to stop. Mira found a small smile. A still, a roof, a door that isn't a lab's. Traps, Jack said. Noise lines. Things that talk to us before things that want us find us. Fire, Sam said and blushed. A small one. They hauled the raft until half of it sat on rind and the other half on the idea of commitment. The mat held. Roots creaked, not unhappy. Sand trapped in fabric leaked and then stopped. They unloaded, tins to a pile that could be called pantry, medical kits to shade that wanted to be clinic, riveter and tools under the panel, the cleaver stuck in a stump. The wrench leaned against the raft. The crowbar lay across Sam's lap. Mira walked 10 paces into mangroves and came back with her hands smelling like green. Jax limped the perimeter and put down jangling lines, chain, cans, wire, so anything with hands would have to make a sound. Kai set the panel at an angle to be roof and mirror both. He breathed once without tasting salt. It frightened him. He did it again. They lit no fire. They ate cold. It tasted better than anything. They drank sips. Evening rose and found them above the tide. The sea touched the Rhine politely and went away. The dead who had followed bumped the seam and then lost interest, as if roots were a polite way of saying no. A few found places to wedge their fingers and knock. The mangroves thudded a duller note than steel. The horizon went from blue to bruised peach to a color that didn't have a name anymore. Offshore, a shape turned where the platform had been and did not show itself. It made a sound like a ship that had taught itself to swim. Inside, Jack said, meaning under the tarp and behind their lines and inside their own ribs. They lay on the door deck and listened to the world they hadn't built yet. The map tube made a pillow for Sam. Mira's cleaver lay between her and the edge. Jax's wrench was under his hand. Kai's club leaned against a root and for once did not seem like a demand. Tomorrow? Sam asked. Still, Mira said. Roof, snares, words that mean we're us. Signals, Kai said. If there are others. There are always others, Jack said. The tide turned. The knocks on the roots faded. In the mangroves, a bird said something whole and kept the rest for morning. Kai watched a gap where the rind lifted into a higher place and thought he saw the darker suggestion of a hill. He thought he smelled dirt that had never been mixed with diesel. He thought he heard for a moment a human voice far away. He did not say any of it. He let the maybes lie down next to him and breathe. We found it, Sam whispered. The rind of the world. Maybe, Mira said. Maybe, Jax echoed. Out beyond the black line of water, something big moved without hurry. They slept anyway.